Welcome back to ServiceMax Live. I'm excited to welcome our two guests today, Mark Wildling and Sarah Cerruti from our Global Customer Transformation team. They're going to dive into some trends and predictions for the new year. Sarah, Mark, great to have you.
Hey, Allie, it's great to be here.
The past few years have brought a ton of change to the field service industry. From adopting remote service to increasing sustainability, companies have had to accelerate their plans to stay competitive. And with this new year approaching, we don't see this slowing down. So let's dive into what changes we can expect to see happening across the service industry next year. Sarah, let's kick off with the topic of digital transformation and what organizations are going to need to do to make this a successful new year.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing, Allie, is really that, with the challenges of the past couple of years, COVID and wars and inflation and everything else, companies are really looking like never before at digital transformation as a way to thrive and grow their businesses. But things look a little bit different this time around, right? I think in the past, there was more of a one-size-fits-all approach to digital transformation. But now companies really seem to be putting a renewed focus on what has been coined as sort of intentional digital transformation, right? The way that I see intentional digital transformation is really digital transformation with a purpose or a clear objective in mind. So organizations are really looking at digital solutions to solve very specific business problems. There's been a lot of renewed interest in industry-specific cloud-based solutions that can really help organizations drive growth through providing them with flexible platforms that are nonetheless tailored to their specific industry vertical. Whereas in the past, what we were seeing was really sort of more generic solutions that were a one-size-fit-all for companies. I think also critical in this, intentional digital transformation really is the renewed focus on the human aspect. In the past, there perhaps wasn't a lot of attention to what was the experience for employees that were leveraging the technology. And now instead, there's really a renewed interest in making the technology relevant to employees, the experience a really positive one for employees. And we've seen a lot of renewed interest really in leveraging strong change management initiatives to ensure that the transformation sticks.
I really like that term, intentional transformation. It sounds like a much needed shift, especially when you look at staggering stats about the failure rate of digital transformations today. So, Mark, I want to bring you to this topic. How do you think service organizations will leverage their digital solutions to stay successful in the face of challenging macroeconomic conditions?
Yeah, I think obviously we've come out of COVID, we've gone into some geopolitical challenges, now we're into recession. They believe it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think with that spiraling inflation, supply chain bottlenecks, which are still around, been around now for over 3 years, we've been starting to see these challenges with supply chain even before COVID. The organizations can't afford to have any more delays. So if they've got a critical production line, they can't afford to have downtime. They need to optimize their uptime. And obviously the service organization that supports them to continue with their production and manufacturing needs to ensure they've got that availability and that uptime. So in order to keep that revenue flowing, companies need to lean in harder, really. And I think what we'll start to see next year is with some of the cost challenges, the production challenges, the efficiency challenges that they've got, they'll start to adopt more and more of these digital technologies, whether that's sort of things like streamlining their preventative maintenance or parts management program through digital, and to drive that and eliminate that downtime. And I think specifically some of the tools that we'll see, I mean, people have played with them a little bit, they use them a little bit more during COVID, and I think over the course of the next year, I think we'll see a lot more of an aggressive push on it, is the use of AI, really, and that real-time data to help to get ahead of the failing, to keep the production line running, and to be able to resolve issues very quickly and use that AI learning to improve your mean time to resolve issues. So I think that's what we'll start to see even more people leaning in towards.
Thanks, Mark. You mentioned supply chain bottlenecks. One response to this challenge has been to prioritize the maintenance of existing equipment so that organizations can avoid having to purchase new assets or parts. So Sarah, I'll bring this next question to you. How will companies with cost-intensive assets ensure that they can maintain the assets and ride out the supply chain issues we're seeing right now?
Yeah. So I think we're all painfully aware that, the past several years have really created a perfect storm, right? The supply chain issues have driven higher costs for parts, labor, and materials, which in turn have led to inflation. In parallel, this kind of financial instability is starting to really make lenders more selective about the capital intensive projects that they're willing to finance and to fund. And what we're seeing is that even capital intensive organizations, if you think about companies like, energy industry and other capital intensive areas that can afford to fund their own capital projects, are instead sort of pulling in and focusing on maximizing free cash flow instead. So as a result of this, really what we're seeing is that more and more asset intensive organizations are instead focusing on OPEX spending or OPEX spending, depending how you say it, in order to help free up this cash flow. So for what this means for asset-centric organizations really is that they're spending a lot more money on the operation and maintenance of existing assets as opposed to investing in new assets. What this is helping them to do is ensuring that with better maintenance and visibility to these existing assets, they can continue to drive better outcomes for customers while at the same time sustaining profitability for their own organization.
I think that's a really salient point, and kind of building off of the idea of avoiding new purchases. Mark, how do you see this affecting the rent versus buy choice for equipment vendors?
So yeah, as Sarah's already said, I think there's a challenge, there's a cash pinch, there's a challenge on that capital OPEX. Usually they're different budget areas of the business. If you have a situation where you are sweating the asset, you get to the point where the asset now is beyond economical repair, or there isn't even an economy, you can't repair it at all. There's going to be an emergency need for keeping that production line going, or having some additional capacity. So one of the things that you start to see more is that leaning into the rental business, which comes typically from the OPEX side of a business rather than CAPEX. So really, I think we'll start to see these companies, OEMs, offering more equipment as a service, a rental. And part of the driver behind that is that they have got manufacturing themselves, they've got overheads, they've got to continue to produce, even though they may not have a customer sale to produce, because they can't afford to stop their production line and stop producing product. So they'll be producing product for stock, which then they will start to look at how they can use that for generating revenue from inventory, which will be through the means of rental or getting into bed with a finance partner in terms of looking at the lease purchase type arrangement. And then equally, what we've seen already with some of our recent customers is there's the middle people, which are the rental organizations, a little bit like car rental companies, where they will take the capital, they will then monetize that capital equipment through renting it and re-renting it to different customers and user groups. So we'll start to see a lot more of that come in. So it's going to be the OEM or a third party in the middle, taking the capital on board or keeping the capital on board and then renting it, which for the consumer, the user of that product, means that they're not tying up capital through a capital investment cycle where there's uncertainty in the future. It gives them a bit more flexibility to do what they need to do. And obviously all of that drives the need more so for an acceleration on that enterprise asset management space, and looking at how they can ensure they have a solution, they can have the vendors linked to the customers and get that visibility of the life cycle of their asset, so that they've got these products which they need to capitalize. They understand the write down as they're going through the rental and the return revenue on those products. And then they understand at what point they need to end the service life of those products, or when do they hit the point where the product is paid for and then they're in purely cash, purely profit sort of side of the business. So they really need to understand what the total cost of ownership of that product is and that breakover point. So yeah, we'll start to see more of that life cycle management, life cycle assets, and sort of maximization of efficiency coming in.
Great, thank you for that. So one last topic that has been on everyone's mind a lot this past year is the circular economy, as service plays a critical role in the reuse and remanufacturing of materials and equipment. So Sarah, how do you see progress toward the circular economy moving next year? Do you think we will see some kind of meaningful shift?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think there's been a lot of talk about the circular economy so far, but there hasn't really been any significant progress made, I would say. But I think 2023 is really going to be an inflection year where organizations are really going to start to become very aggressive in exploring new ways to participate in the circular economy, and even leveraging the circular economy to drive new revenue streams. I think, you know, in part, the energy market volatility is responsible for this, as well as sort of a renewed push towards meeting net zero targets for many companies. But I also think there's been a shift. I feel like there's been a shift in this in the air this year in terms of a growing socioeconomic sentiment that's putting pressure on companies really to strive for more sustainable and responsible growth. One really interesting example of this that I heard recently, right? So you have oil wells, and these oil wells obviously over time finish producing and become depleted. And now these same oil and gas companies are really looking at ways to transform to cleaner, more renewable energy sources. And one of the things that they're actually working on is leveraging these depleted wells for carbon reinjection purposes, right? So you're basically leveraging the same equipment that you used to produce a well to reinject a well. And that's a really new and innovative way of thinking of, we're not just going to throw things away, right? But we're going to figure out to leverage these things to drive a very positive outcome. I think also, you know, what's changed is that, as you know, because of the economy that we're in, there's really a shortage of workers, right? So employers are working very hard to retain the workforces that they have and attract new talent. And if you think about the younger generations, right, they really want a job with a purpose, or a job where they can give back sort of to the world that they live in. And I think that working for employers where, you know, you have this sentiment of a circular economy and trying to reuse and recycle really makes it that much more attractive for these younger workers to go work for these companies.
Well, it sounds like we are in for another very transformative year. So Sarah and Mark, thank you so much for joining me today to talk through these trends and predictions for 2023. And that is it for this.
Thank you for inviting us.
You're welcome. That's it for ServiceMax Live.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.